to tell you things are bad. Everybody knows things are bad. It's a depression. Everybody's out of work or scared of losing their job. The dollar buys a nickel's worth. Banks are going bust. Shopkeepers keep a gun under the counter. Punks are running wild in the street. There's nobody anywhere who seems to know what to do, and there's no end to it. We know the air is unfit to breathe. Our food is unfit to eat. We sit watching our TVs while some local newscaster tells us that today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be. We know things are bad, worse than bad. They're crazy. It's like everything everywhere is going crazy, so we don't go out anymore. We sit in the house, and slowly the world we're living in is getting smaller, and all we say is, please, at least leave us alone in our living rooms. Let me have my toaster and my TV and my steel-belted radios, and I won't say anything. Just leave us alone. Well, I'm not going to leave you alone. I want you to get mad.
Okay, peace and blessings to you all. Welcome back. Episode 18. Continuing on today, focusing a little bit on the Prussian model and the Rockefeller contributions, as well as breaking down a couple more pieces of that last clip we covered yesterday. I want to thank you all for being with me today. And we are strolling through Paris today. Nice little stroll through Paris, beautiful Paris. So yeah, let's jump right into it. I want to bring us here. Just some of the focus today: the Prussian model, business, and institutionalization. This is building off of these ideas here. What is school for? The societal and cultural we're going to be really diving into today. Focusing more on this infrastructure, the business aspect. The socialized childcare is an economic stabilizer or tool, so it is like a pillar of the business aspect of it. And this is where Rockefeller, with the assistance of the Ford Foundation policies that were pretty much the same, that also aligned rather well with LBJ's Great Society project, which introduced massive progressive ideological change via policy, transforming culture and society, and really putting us, or at least assisting in the process of getting us where we're at today. The progressive movement has been a long-term deconstruction and destabilizing effort, terrorizing the American population, decentering us all, giving us false hope in man, his machines, and his institutions. And this is where a lot of this stuff began. In the late 1800s, when we're talking about the Gilded Age, the development of the robber barons, the aristocracy, the big banker class, the real plutocracy that we're still dealing with today. We're just switching over to this independent, so-called libertarian version of it. But we're going to look back a little bit and see its connection to education, because education is important because it directly influences culture, socializes the generations and the populations. It's that which prepares people to think and be and do in the world. So, of course, they have to get a hold of that early. As Bertrand Russell had mentioned, you have to get a hold of the children very early with regard to social engineering, shaping their perception of reality and the perception of themselves, and of course, their perception of their position in society. And what we see with a lot of this is this very Republican, or should I say Republic, the Republic of Plato, this idea of an elite class creating a plebeian wonderland. That's really what these guys tried to do in the very beginning. At least this is how they wrote about it. I bet in their personal conversations, they had different things to say and probably used different terminology. We're going to dig through a little bit of these writings from the early 1900s so you guys can see what some of the perspectives were. And it's my argument that what we're hearing from the, say, super modern or contemporary billionaire class is exactly the same. It's just said a little different, maybe with some glasses and a chainsaw or something, orange skin and a toupee, maybe, but it's all the same. It isn't much different at all. It's just being administered in a new way through new technologies and new forms of entertainment. So, Prussian model, business, and institutionalization. With the Prussian model, we get the socialization aspect of it. And of course, instrumentalism, which is key, and we're going to touch on this today. It's so fascinating how even in the education, we see the instrumentalism, not just in the public health or in the medical industry, not just in the labor force or in the corporate system, but also in the schooling. And in my view, is because instrumentalism is a part of dehumanizing God's creation, turning us into nodes, turning us into units, cogs in the machine, if you will. So this foundational view of mankind is distributed throughout all systems, even the education system. And of course, business, just the economic structure. And institutionalization is the centralizing force of the education system by way of the Prussian model, but then reinvigorated, or let's say extended further, through Rockefeller and the general education system he was, or at least their group put out in the 70s. And then there's the enculturation, so it builds culture as well, and then the overall infrastructure of it. So let's go back quickly here. I don't want to spend too much time on this clip, but I want to go back. I have some timestamps of some specific things he says that I personally believe are referring to the Prussian model, the business model, and the institutionalization. Though they don't mention it here in the clip we watched yesterday, I believe this is what they're actually referring to, or at least their complaints, the things that they're upset about are due to this Prussian model, business model, and the institutionalization of this generalizing education force. Okay, so let me pull this back up here. And this one is specifically referring to the business model aspect of schooling.
And it's not just me. Millions of students sing the same song. How many of you guys avoid eye contact with the teacher to try not to get caught upon? Afraid to raise your hand for fear of being wrong, which proves that school isn't an environment for learning or building up the intellect. It's just a game you play for grades and how many A's you can collect. But I guess what do you expect when the most commonly asked question in class is this gonna be on the test?
Now, that little part there was mentioning, well, is this really about education? Is it really, or should I say learning? Right? Is schooling, at least in the form we've experienced, really about learning, or is it more about memorization, standardization, and I would argue measurement, and that's what we're going to touch on with the Prussian model. Measurement, which is a part of instrumentalism, turning everything into quantification. Even education is now no longer multifaceted and diverse and nuanced and complex, but it's now standard or standardized. Right? It can be measured. This focus on measurable outcomes, very progressive, right? When we think of outcome-based policy, it's always been the same. Yeah. Shout out to Pioyo. Good to see you. He is on Facebook, I believe, this guy. This is an old clip, but it's going kind of viral on Twitter right now. And I think because Musk is preparing to reconstruct the education system with his AI, that now they're pushing this to get people to call for reform, like a Rockefeller 2.0 education reform, but through the technocrats, right? The new aristocratic or autocratic class. So yes, good to see you, Mo Griff, as well. And everybody else listening, everybody else in the chat, thank you for being here. Crystal Lane, Javster, Paul, Lamond, Vanessa, No One, good to see you guys. Passing Traveler, of course, always a blessing to see you in there. Okay, let's continue. So there's that one there. That's speaking directly to the Prussian model. And let's go to 252. Here's another one. This thing is just riddled with so many good little parts that speak to something much bigger, a bigger system that isn't discussed. You know, now the points have relevance and truth to them, but there's actually some history behind this. So let's hear this part.
The teachers always say, use your time wisely. But that never made sense to me. Because these 6 cruel hours of our lives we call school might literally be the worst use of time management ever in history. Think about it. The traditional teaching method is foolish. No, it's useless, multiplied by the square root of stupid.
Now, very important little clip there, because what he's saying is, well, this isn't a good use of time. What's up with this structure? And again, this gets back to the Prussian model and the very standardized, formulaic structure of the education system. All right, now let's continue a little bit more here.
What they do is they cram information in your head, force feeding you, and then you throw it up on the test. That's not education. That's bulimia. And the more bulimic you are, the better you will do on their assessments. So it's no wonder why so many students graduate mentally and emotionally anorexic. See, school teaches you how to memorize dots. True education should teach you how to connect them. True education teaches you how to catch a fish. School teaches you, yeah, you caught the fish, but you didn't show your work, so it doesn't count. Throw it back. I'm just asking, what is school for? It's not education. That's just not true. If you still think that, you might be sniffing glue. See, the word education comes from the Latin root educe, meaning bring out, i.e. bring the gifts out of a person and make them viable. But school doesn't bring out much. It just stuffs more facts inside of you. Now, some of that stuff is justifiable. We need reading, writing, and some arithmetic. That's fair.
Wow, that part there was probably, out of this whole clip, the best one to sum up precisely the fallout and problematic features of the Prussian model. Now, what I'm going to do is, as I've been taking these little clips to demonstrate what they're trying to get at, let's look at what they're getting at, even if we're not hearing it. So we're going to go directly to the Prussian model. I found a couple clips on YouTube that I think have done a good job at summarizing some of these things. So we'll be looking at those to really understand what it is, or at least what's the cause? What's the catalyst? What's the foundation of what he's actually talking about here? Right? Now let's look into this here. Let me pull this up. All right, let me look at my notes. All right, we're good there. Now, this is the origins of the American public education system. Horace Mann, who pretty much can be the one, I guess, like the pioneer of really popularizing the Prussian model in our education system. So let's look at this little clip here. It's about 8 minutes. It's well done. Again, you know, sometimes the music is a bit over the top, but let's try to get through this. I think the information is pretty good. Pretty good. Yeah. Okay. So let's check this out.
And now we come to the great man himself, a man history records as being instrumental in the creation of America's public education system. Horace Mann was an American educator who served as a member of the U.S. House of Representatives, part of the American Congress. Horace Mann was the key reformer of the education system at the time. In 1837, he became the head of the newly created Board of Education in Massachusetts, where he began the work that would eventually earn him the title as the father of American public education. After reading through the educational models of different countries, Mann finally hears about a particularly successful style that had been developed in Prussia, which is now modern-day Germany. The Prussian system had shown to be such a success for the government's purposes that, accompanied by a few other educators, Horace Mann travels to Germany to investigate. Upon their return to the United States, they lobbied heavily to have the Prussian model adopted.
All in favor, say aye.
Interest in Prussia had also been growing in the northern half of the continent. Around this time, the Canadian Superintendent of Schools, Egerton Ryerson, traveled to Prussia in search of a new model of education. His journeys also included visiting Horace Mann in Massachusetts to further examine the system he would eventually adopt. George Brown, the editor of Toronto's Globe newspaper, was even quoted saying that Ryerson had successfully imported Prussian education into Ontario. During the next 30 years or so, a whole line of American dignitaries came to Germany to earn degrees. Interestingly enough, those who earned degrees in Germany came back to the United States to staff all the major universities. By 1900, all the PhDs in the United States were trained in Prussia.
Very, very interesting. And by the way, I'll be placing this clip as well as the main clip we've been using. I'll put the links in the description so you guys can check these out if you're interested. And I also wanted to mention, though, and we talked a little bit about this yesterday, though we understand our system is completely corrupt, the world's corrupt, right? We're in it, we're not of it. So it isn't to say we can actually escape corruption in this world. So I want to make it clear that it's very important for those in these systems, especially teachers, those involved in these institutions. It is important that we have real, I'd even argue, Christian thinking and loving educators in this system to make a difference. Because I've noticed, though I've had great teachers, I've had bad teachers. And I do understand that some teachers shouldn't be teaching, but I do understand that there's a lot that should. We need good people in these institutions changing kids' lives, even within this system that's flawed and detrimental in many ways. But the individuals can make a big difference. And I don't have to tell you, you guys know how to play within the system, or should I say rage against the machine while you're in it. There's many, I've had teachers that were very rebellious in intellectual ways, we'll say, and taught me a lot of interesting things, or gave me the opportunity to look at things a little different. For instance, oh, well, maybe this is what the book says, but is that really the case? Or how about this that happened, or, anecdotes here, and, different things that they might have read in other locations, just sprinkling a little bit of nuance on things and not necessarily diving headfirst into the curriculum as if it's gospel, but offering up an open door to ideas and to possibly look at things at, from different perspectives. I've had some teachers that really almost in some ways taught against some of the curriculum, but, opened up some doors for me intellectually that I will never forget. So it's very important that we have good people in these industries making a difference, because we got to go to them no matter what. The majority of us have no choice but to put our children in these institutions. So we need good people in them. I just want to make that clear.
As the first secretary of the State Board of Education, Horace Mann promoted his new concept that the state is the father of children. He stressed that it was the responsibility of the state to ensure that education was provided for the child. A very noble idea, of course, but what exactly did he mean by that? And how did he define education? It seems like a very broad subject. It is a very broad subject. Education encompasses all of human history and all the knowledge we have gathered during that time. Not to mention, and perhaps most importantly, what we as human beings learn over our lifetime on a personal level. Horseman's 10th annual report in 1846 led to the first state law that made it mandatory for children to go to school. It was during that year that he supported the governor of Massachusetts in adopting the Prussian model of education for the entire state. How did he do that? The governor of the time, Edward Everett, as it turns out, was the very first to receive a PhD from, can you guess where? That's right, Prussia. From then on, it spread very quickly. Just after Everett installed the Prussian model in the state of Massachusetts, the governor of New York set up the very same method in 12 New York schools. Horseman's sister, Elizabeth Peabody, of the Peabody Foundation, saw to it that right after the Civil War, the Prussian system that was then being taught in the northern states was integrated into the conquered South. By 1900, most of the compulsory schooling laws that implemented the new system had been passed. From then on, every American child grew up under the Prussian system. So what exactly was the Prussian education system that everyone thought was so amazing that it just had to be adopted throughout the free world? To give you just a bit of background, in the 18th century, the Kingdom of Prussia, which is now modern-day Germany, was among the first countries of the world to introduce free and compulsory education. After the Prussians were defeated by Napoleon in 1806, it was decided that the reason why the battle was lost was that the Prussian soldiers were thinking for themselves in the battlefield instead of following orders. To make sure that this couldn't happen again, a new 8-year system of schooling was created. This new system provided not only the skills needed for the early industrialized world, such as reading, writing, and arithmetic, but also a strict education that taught duty, discipline, respect for authority, and the ability to follow orders. Elite children destined for higher offices went on to attend private schools, while the rest of the population had no access to the secondary education. They were destined for the working class. Through this new system, the Prussian court tried to create social obedience in the citizens through indoctrination. Every individual had to become convinced at the core of their being that the king was just, his decisions were always right, and the need for obedience paramount. In truth, the entire purpose of the system was to instill loyalty to the crown and to train young men for the military and bureaucracy.
Now, we can see how this system would be advantageous, especially to America, as we were this new budding country that was a war machine from the very beginning. And when you're a war machine, or let's just say your success as a country and a nation is dictated by a victory on the battlefield, then you need public approval, right? You need the people and the citizenry behind such acts, and even proud. There needs to be some development of pride, this kind of patriotism. Now, I'm not saying I'm not anti-patriotism. You know, I am an American, and in a very rational sense, I can say that I love my country because this is the only country I know. But at the same time, I can be open-minded enough to realize how patriotism can be used as a weapon. And I think we saw that, especially with the First World War and into the Second World War. But also, I think the education system that we chose to standardize, it really it assists in developing that kind of collectivism. Interestingly enough, this is a progressive movement. This is a liberal country. This is supposed to be a place about freedom and liberty. Yet if you look historically, all of our systems come from a very centralized, almost dictator-like system. And if we look back, we see this Prussian model is no different. And it's, in a sense, if we really look into it, it's very socialist, national socialism, if you will. And national socialism can work in certain countries that are very small, that are very homogenous, and that decide that that's what they want. America's much different, right? We're very diverse. We have a chaotic history. There's all types of people here. There's a troubled past. We're like, we're a mess. Okay, so it's a different place. It's an experiment. It's a scientific experiment. So these types of social systems don't work outside of some type of fascism or dictatorship, some type of overbearing rule. And I find it so interesting how we're constantly incorporating these types of systems into our nation. And if we look back, we could see it through the Prussian model. And then we get the Project Paperclip that kind of brought a lot of those scientists here that ended up developing our public health industry and our medical industry, our medical industrial complex. We understand the war machine, and that's that history that goes all the way back to World War I. But then we think about who is stepping in now under this guise of libertarianism, under this guise of, independent, individualistic, liberty-loving, freedom-fighting billionaires. They are incorporating centralized systems. AI, as an example. Algorithmic control is a centralization power. It's no different. I just find it so fascinating how we're moving right into the same direction. And they're selling this idea of decentralization. They're selling us this idea of liberty and freedom. But in fact, these systems are just as draconian. Really, really interesting.
To do this,
I believe this is why they called it the Fourth Reich. And I'm saying it's deeper than that. It's deeper than Nazism and stuff. I think that's still surface. Not to say that there aren't elements of this. It's much deeper than this and far more nuanced and complex. But it is to say these systems are inherently moving towards a fascistic kind of organized thing when we look at the actual technology and the grip it has on people's minds, especially the algorithms. Really, really interesting future ahead if we think about these things.
it was necessary to squeeze out all independent thinking from the masses.
See, now they don't need to squeeze out independent thinking. The thinking has been designed already. The culture is so corrupt, right? It's so debased and reprobate that they don't have to do much anymore. We're doing it ourselves now. We're encouraged by the system's normative narcissism, right? We're encouraged by this culture of narcissism. We're encouraged by the algorithms that create viral movements and popular culture. We're divided based on these algorithms. We're divided by the left and the right that are both controlled, and that aren't left or right. It's just this strange fusion of polarized neoliberalism and neoconservatism. It's fascinating, man. And they have the abilities now to have a hands-off approach. It's all automated. It's, what is it? It's self-perpetual even. Really interesting.
Influencing this new system from the beginning was Prussian philosopher Johann Gottlieb Fichte. Combining John Locke's view that the children are a blank slate and Rousseau's ideas on how to write on that slate, Prussia established an educational system that was considered scientific in nature. An important part of the Prussian system was that it defined for the child what was to be learned, what was to be thought about, and how long to think about it. In order to have an efficient policy-making class and a subclass beneath it, it was believed that one had to remove the power of most people to make sense out of the available information. In other words, critical thinking had to be done away with. Now, if you're wondering why the average person doesn't know that the North American education system is based directly on the Prussian model, it might just be because its original purpose was not designed for the good of the individual, but for the good of the government.
Absolutely. And I think what we're undergoing now with these algorithms on social media are exactly the same. It's exactly the same. It's structuring people's thinking and their perception and perspective of reality in a way that fits a false paradigm, in a way that structures you or gets you to join one side or the other that are both controlled by the overall governmental system. And now it's a plutocratic, public-private partnership corporation situation. So we're dealing with a feigned state, a feigned government that's actually it's a multipolar corporate entity disguised as a government, if you will.
philosophy of Johann Fichte directly influenced the creation of the Prussian model of schooling, as he is quoted saying, "The schools must fashion the person, and fashion him in such a way that he simply cannot will otherwise than what you wish him to will." With quotes like these, you can see why his involvement is not well known. Education should aim at destroying free will, so that after pupils are thus schooled, they will be incapable throughout the rest of their lives of thinking or acting otherwise than as their schoolmasters would have wished. When this technique has been perfected, every government that has been in charge of education for more than one generation will be able to control its subjects securely without the need of armies or policemen.
Wow.
In 1807, in a Berlin occupied by Napoleon, Johann Fichte gave a series of famous addresses to the German nation. Fichte spoke of the superiority of German people above all others. The content of these speeches was a catalyst for the Prussian education system and German nationalism.
So now it really goes into this kind of Nazi view, and it's, in my view, it's much deeper than Nazis. We can't even consider any of this without addressing Israel and the influence there. So, of course, most things there'll always be a little one-sided, but I think there is something to this, definitely. In fact, some have made great arguments that that whole situation was a proxy, an actual proxy movement. Yeah, it's definitely insane and creepy and scary, but these ways of seeing people in society are baked into all of our governmental systems as well as our education system. And it's vital that we understand this, lest we be taken advantage of and duped by those in power, like what's happening right now through the Elon, right? This Trump and Elon situation. So let's go back here. Now, okay, no, we're not ready for that yet. Let's go to this one here. Okay, so these are some key model features of the Prussian model. That video didn't go much into the features because for whatever reason, it wanted to focus more on the history and how it developed and what was behind it. I think what's of most importance now is the actual features of the Prussian model that we see baked into our current education system. And I think these are the features that actually shape the mind and the behavior of the population. So here we have the Rockefeller Institute General Education Board, 1903 to 1964. So this is when the transition really occurred. Now, as you saw, the Prussian model was introduced to America in the mid-19th century, right? I think around maybe 1830s. And it became popular through certain educators, or should we say academics, statesmen, etc., and then really pushed by way of Horace Mann. And with that, of course, Rockefeller joins in, and we understand what happened in 1913 with the economy and everything. So it's fascinating, as well as the medical industry. That's a whole other story. We might dig into that too. You know, the whole Rockefeller takeover of the medical education system, which I think we actually might have talked about that years ago, but it's definitely connected, right? So, in fact, I'm going to show you an excerpt from one of these books here in a second that's going to speak directly to that, and it shows how since the very beginning they've been focused on education and health. Guys, education and health, and it's so interesting. We could read something from 1903, and it literally mirrors what we're being fed and told today as far as public policy and education and public health and, curing disease, etc. Maha, right? So the whole MAGA Maha thing is literally what the Rockefellers were doing with Ford Foundation and many other groups, Masons, etc. It's so interesting how literally nothing has changed. They're just updating the processes. They're putting in new technologies, new faces. Everything is just as well as updating the models, right? So here we have Rockefeller Institute's education reform policies, along with similar policy influence of the Ford Foundation and the Great Society projects of LBJ, would build on the Prussian model foundations in the 1970s. So that's when things really took a turn, when the Rockefeller Institute policies of education reform. Oh yeah, the Bushes are heavy. Yeah, I actually, it's an old video. It's from, I think, 2018. If you're interested in the story of the Bushes, you should definitely go to my main channel and check out the Bush family ties video I made. It's short. I think it might be about 13 to 16 minutes long. And I go through the history of the Bush family and eugenics, and CIA and the banking families. It's a pretty interesting little clip there for those interested in that history. But yeah, quite a bit of it is about Prescott Bush. Yeah. The pretty much the pioneer, if you will. He's kind of he's the one that started it all, bringing it all in. So yeah, good point, Miguela. So here, and think about this. Think about the 70s, how much changed just in so many different ways, especially media-wise, which we talk a lot about on this channel, on the backup. You know, when we talk about music and popular culture, the record industry, the 70s was huge. Hollywood, right? The 70s was, I believe the 70s was the decade of the recording industry. The 70s was when the DJ was birthed, when the record industry blew up. And even Hollywood started to there was a rebirth of Hollywood because the old Hollywood had died in the late 50s into the 60s, right? And then we get blaxploitation, so we get the independent movement growing in the 70s, I believe 71. So it's just, I'm fascinated historically, you know, when I think of these things and how much they have influenced where we're at. And it's just, there's so much information out there to really see it. I just wish more people understood how these things played into it. But anyhow, with that happening, we also had a massive change in the education system. During that boom of music and record industry, Hollywood, right? Yeah, it's dead again. Good point, Barry. Good to see you. It's dead again, yes. So is Hollywood going to come back? Is Hollywood going to have some super modern revival where there will be this new technologically supported Hollywood, right? Like, will it be some AI incorporated or AI integrated thing? I think that's what Hollywood's going to turn to. I believe we'll see Joan is Awful, the Black Mirror review we did on the Patreon and locals. The Joan is Awful episode of Black Mirror, where her identity is actually stolen in that episode, but this idea of selling your likeness or licensing your likeness, and your likeness being reproduced by algorithm, or should I say AI, I think they might be moving towards that. Right. Oh yeah, Wallenbergs, yep, Ericsson Mobile, yeah, we've talked about Ericsson. Yeah, absolutely. There's so many involved, right? I mean, it would take forever to really go down the list, but you're absolutely correct. There's smaller players, bigger players. Absolutely. Yeah, you're absolutely correct. Yeah, and his boy George Herbert Walker. There we go. Michael Ryan, good to see you. Regmon in the building. Good to see you, brother Reg. Mo Griff is with us. Yeah, AI, new entertainment genre. Yeah, it's here. You know, it's already here. It's happening. But I think we will see people licensing their likeness in Hollywood to survive. For Hollywood to survive, I mean, it's going to go that route. Now, there will be a natural, organic human entertainment that will last forever, but I think it will be more underground because people are always going to want to see real people. But I believe that type of industry will be more underground, and the mainstream will be generated content. Yes, good point, Reg. Since all the actors are running away and hiding, all characters will be computer generated. Yep, and then they'll be hiding in their bunkers, licensing their likeness and collecting a check while they don't have to do anything at all, and the computers just generate images of them. And different production companies borrow them or buy them off of each other, rent them, etc. Yeah. Now, So these are the features, right? Compulsory attendance, teacher certification, standard testing, age-graded classrooms, national curriculum, obedience and discipline. Now, these are some of the main ones. There's other ones that we'll be definitely touching eventually. But when you look at this, guys, we all experience this. Every single one of us here, even in those that went to private school, it's the same system, usually of a little better quality, maybe smaller classrooms, a little more one-on-one, higher quality facilities, etc. But this structure is here, right? Compulsory attendance, which is a way to keep people in, you got to fill those desks, right? To maintain funding, right? And if we think about the overall infrastructure of kids being in these buildings 8 hours a day, it allows their parents to work. So it all feeds back into the overall economic system. And one that I find really interesting is the teacher certification, right? It's huge because what this now does is it standardize teacher quality and value, right? It makes a standardized value set of teachability, which is crazy to me because one's ability to teach is unique, right? Everyone has different skills and different things to offer in that regard. There isn't some standard teacher-approved set of information or qualities. But again, it's quantification. It can't measure quality. And this gets right into Taylorism, which we'll touch on in a minute here. This is just Taylorism applied to social programs or social institutions. It's the factory-based instrumentalism of Taylorism in the Industrial Revolution applied to education, turning us all into cogs, right? So another part of this teacher certification that I think is really important is this idea of, this was big, man. Let me bring this over here, where they changed the training for teachers. Right, before, in we'll say olden times, or before these systems were more centralized and federalized, when education was more homeschool or small schools created in communities, the teacher was usually a master of the subject, or at least highly proficient in the subject, as well as other subjects. Right, there was more of this Renaissance flavor where they, or polymath, if you will, right? People having skills in many different subjects, depth in many different concentrations and disciplines, if you will. Now, what they did was they shifted from a type of subject mastery to pedagogical, that's such a hard word to say, pedagogical, that's it, pedagogical theory, right? There was this shift to a pedagogical theory and method. So it was this new standard theory-based system that all teachers had to adhere to, which takes away all of the uniqueness and offerings from that mind, from that thinker. And it turns them into this cookie cutter, factory produced object that isn't much different from the rest. Now, this isn't to say that they can actually take away people's talents and offerings, but that's not what they're worried about. They're not worried. And this reminds me I'm telling you, man, this really upset me when I was in grad school. And I remember I wrote a paper, and, I tend to, and it's just, I can't help it. I tend to write with a little bit of, I don't know. I like using a lot of metaphors. I've been an MC my whole life, so I like to use a lot of metaphors and, I guess, poetic writing in my nonfiction style of writing. And I'll never forget my teacher. He gave me maybe a B- or something. He said, it was a great paper. You hit all the points, just get rid of the style. You know, he told me, he's like, straight up, like, there's too much style here. Get rid of this. And I looked at him like, what? Like, what do you want me to do? Write like a, you know, I don't know, like this is what AI is doing. Just writing like a machine with no life, with no soul, you know, with no style. You know, I think things like style present an element of authenticity, and it gives you a little bit of the writer, it gives you a little bit of the person. You know, and they're not interested in that. He's like, I'm not interested in your way of conveying information. I just want the information. And not too long after that, I dropped out of the program, by the way, for many different reasons. COVID was part of it as well. And plus, it was just too damn expensive. I literally couldn't afford it. But yeah, that really broke me, honestly. I was like heartbroken. You know, I was like, what is this? You know, what is this? So, and this is what education is for the most part at every level, whether it's elementary or the grad level. You know, a PhD program, you know, they want you to write like a robot. They're not interested in your uniqueness, your unique ideas or concepts or way of delivering information. They just want it to be like some robot wrote it. They just want you to hit all the points, right? Very Prussian, hit all the points. Yeah, it really discouraged me. Anyhow, we're seeing something similar with teachers here, right? Instead of subject mastery, the teacher now just has to, you know, hit all the marks on a certain subject, and the teachers end up being less knowledgeable in the core subjects. But also, what you find is it's much easier to be a teacher, and then you have people that shouldn't be teaching, or people that aren't really passionate about teaching or children or minds and developing minds and learning, taking the job to make money. But before, it took a certain skill and set of knowledge and practice and development for someone to have a role as a teacher. So what they've done is they've streamlined things. They've made things much easier for anybody to fit the role, because that's what education had turned into, just a set of roles everyone's playing, a system. Now, then, of course, standard testing, age-graded classrooms, that was new. You know, very formulaic, national curriculum. It became federalized. And then obedience and discipline. And we saw that with the clip I showed you there, just this very obedience-focused thing. So now this is just what their system pushed. It isn't to say it always succeeded everywhere. And as I said, and I experienced it myself, a lot of teachers broke the rules and were rebellious. I had some awesome teachers back growing up that really were different. And I'm so thankful for them. So it isn't to say that everyone follows this system, but this is the general system. Now, let's see, let's go here. Okay, so other major problems were standardization, just general instrumentalism. So instrumentalism is rooted in measurement, right? This over-reliance on standardized testing, which quantifies the student's value and the student's worth. It gives the student a status that is measurable, even the concept of grades, even, right? Now, I'm not saying there should be no levels of measurement, because then we get into some weird stuff, which is like postmodern, right? We're not going to give anybody grades. Nobody wins the game, you know, this kind of stuff. That's a bit too far left, I guess. But yeah, it's this over-reliance on standardized testing. So standardization, which just turns everyone into instruments, and loss of local control. I think this is probably one of the most painful things, is because it went from these culture-based, regional, local controlled education where you were at, the culture and just regional form or folkways, these types of things were developed and brought people together. All of that stuff was erased once the centralization and federalization came in. right? So it's this progressive hegemony. So it goes from, oh, forget about your local practices and, you know, your local customs, your local vernacular, all of these things. We're just going to standardize everything. And this is a progressive hegemony where it's like everyone has to operate the way we say is proper, I guess, culturally. And this is really globalism. And when we look at Rockefeller, he was one of these early globalists, right? That wasn't interested in the American or the Americana and all the awesome, cool little cultures that we had. He wanted to turn America into a business. And essentially it always was, for the most part. Not according to the people that lived on the land, right? But as far as those who have always had control over our systems, this has been the case. And it's globalism, it's neoliberalism, proto-neoliberalism, if you will. Because neoliberalism didn't really become a thing until the 70s. Now, this was a push for centralized federal control, right? And it was seen, people would complain because it was seen as undermining the community input and values in education. So it undermines the communities and the regional cultures, which is a major blow to everything these cultures and regions and people groups have built over time to just transform into this very factory-based education system. Very draconian. But of course, under the guise of progress, right? Under the guise of liberalism. Right. Now think about the centralizing nature of algorithms. Think about how centralizing algorithms can be, how concrete they can be, right? Once they're implemented and everything is functioning through these automated systems of algorithms. Can you imagine how long it would take to, say, get those algorithms to be adjusted to fit, say, the needs of the people? Wow, it's a creepy thought, you know? It's amazing that people are calling for this type of future. Knowing our past. Maybe they don't know the past. That's why we're talking about it. Because we're doomed to repeat it. Just with bigger weapons. Yeah, it's this top-down approach. Right, so let's see. Then there is of course, centralization, federalization. It became a government estate thing, federal control over the schools. It went from decentralized, localized education systems of small schools, clusters, schools, homeschool, to this new federal system of big buildings, desks, bells, rules. Let's say an entire, if you will, this force, right? This force of teachers, etc. And then there's the corporate influence. This is how Rockefeller pulled this off. He threw a bunch of money. I think I got to read through some writings, and I'll be returning to this idea. But he was throwing money at counties, and basically any county that would take up this new system would get the money. And we've seen that happen before. Yes, that's a good way to say it, Bari. Education destroys imagination. This style of education directly destroys imagination. And this speaks to my point about the writing and my professor at the time in grad school, how he was just destroying my imagination when he was like, you know what, just write without any style, just write normal, you know, like a robot. It's exactly that. Yeah. And it was weird because it wasn't like it was anything wild. It was just wasn't typical, I guess. But they weren't typical, I guess. Yeah, he was throwing shekels. He sure was. And then there's the decline of academic rigor. This has to do with the teacher qualifications as well as the curriculum that they were teaching students. They went away from a more classical view, away from more foundational things like logic and philosophy, aspects of the humanities that are very important, the trivium, etc., and going more into basic subjects, but also focusing on trade schools too, which some would argue is a good thing. Now, I understand these arguments, and I think they're very helpful and they're very useful, especially today. They're probably more valuable considering making a living in the world. because education doesn't really set you up for a living. But again, when we look at the beginning of this structure, it was about putting people in work industries, labor forces. So the trades helped that. They were just basically preparing people to work in the systems and the companies and factories that they owned. So, and again, I think, students are very different. People are very different. There's a large population of people that should go directly into the trades that might not be interested in certain things, and they should have the choice to do that. But there also should be alternatives for those that say are more interested in the humanities, are more interested in some of the more classical forms of learning and knowledge. But again, that would be if the systems were based on the needs of the people, but it's always been based on the needs of the corporation, the industry, and of course the state. You get to control the education systems to keep people in the economy by way of labor force, but you also get to control people's minds through educating them and enculturating them with, say, nationalistic or patriotic ways of seeing the world, so they'll support war. So they'll support the war machine. They'll be proud of genocide, and they will go funnel directly into the systems that operate or that maintain the economic system. This is very well thought out, and I'm going to read you something here that is very blatant what they wanted to do. And then measurable outcome based. Okay, so this is just this progressive crap. Right? Measurable outcome based. Everything is measurable, and they want a certain type of outcome. They want to turn people into guinea pigs. As little nuance and complexity as possible. Generalization, averaging out, man. How much soul loss occurs this way? Oof, that's a great question. Quite a bit, I'd say. Quite a bit. Yeah, they'll give you a degree in almost anything today because it costs money. And these damn degrees are very expensive. It's amazing what they'll give you a degree for these days, and they're making a pretty penny. Performance proper behavior, right? So that's obedience. And then change in teacher requirements. We talked about that. Now, let's go here, right? The Rockefeller Institute General Education Board, 1903 to 1964. The system modernized and intensified the Prussian model by upgrading its technologies, training, and structuring methods, as well as social indoctrination methods in the 70s. But now let's go back. Let's go back a little bit. I want to read you guys some things. These are disturbing words here, but this is where it all comes from. Quickly, we'll look at this short clip here, just a couple minutes. Frederick Taylor and scientific management. I want you guys to see how this Taylorism was applied to the education system. So we get this mixture of Rockefeller education reform based on the Prussian model, but then we also see how the Prussian model is very similar to Taylorism. So let's quickly look
Frederick
at this.
Taylor is a founding father of organizational studies. His scientific management approach has surely touched many aspects of your professional life, as you will see. He was a mechanical engineer and a management consultant. That meant that he was an outside person that would come into organizations to try to help them make things better. Factories at the time were springing up everywhere, and standardized ways didn't yet exist to manage large groups of people and handle increasingly complex work. So Taylor saw this need, and he wanted to step in and make organizations more standardized, efficient, and productive by studying their work processes closely. Scientific management is the term he used. He did a lot of studies and wrote books about it. It's basically meant applying science to work, studying tasks carefully, systematically at the micro level to speed up work. He wanted to break away from
the assembly line came out of Taylorism. So I'm sure you can see how this works, turning everything into a mechanistic, systematic, automated processing form of production, right? Turning one of the key factors or key influences with Taylorism was breaking up big tasks that would usually require some highly skilled professional or expert, taking their task or their production and breaking it up into small tasks and then giving each little small task to a group of people. And the problem here is this is a type of specialization, so you lose this more general understanding of how things work and ability even. It's a type of de-skilling process where you go from highly skilled, knowledgeable, and able workers and builders to now just a bunch of worker bees who are doing little bits and pieces of an overall process, and they don't really know at all how the whole thing works together. They couldn't create or produce anything on their own. They become just little cogs in this overall process. So you're taking an overall process that used to be done by certain individuals with a certain level of skill and talent and practice and history, etc., and breaking all what they can do into little things and giving it to workers and creating a streamlined kind of factory system. And unfortunately, with this change, you lose the skilled experts, right? You lose these multifaceted builders and creators that we had in the past. And this transformed industry and really set the future for the Industrial Revolution. It is Taylorism that allowed these massive factories to succeed at such speed, especially with the automobile, which is where it gained most use.
The common sense rules of thumb that he saw as unproven and inefficient. So workers had their own self-styled ways of doing things that they would pass around. And he said, hey, there's really no way to know if this is the best way to do things, so let's study it. Scientific management is also known as Taylorism, which of course is named after him. Division of labor is a practice that he believed in. He wanted to divide work processes into very small, simple, and separate steps.
You also understand why that's advantageous, because before you would have to pay probably, say, a prettier penny to a skilled worker who had a lot of abilities that can do full-on processes and produce massive things. You'd probably have to spend more money paying one of these individuals, opposed to taking what they build or that process, breaking it up into little steps, and then paying much less to those other workers. No longer did you need to hire specialists or experts in these different types of things. And of course, we have to consider scale. Right. Just mere scale is also a reason that, and I'd say probably the main reason this was utilized, because these industries were growing and they were developing and expanding. And this was when the Industrial Revolution was really booming and capitalism started to make its way. Of course, warfare and creating war weaponry required very fast-paced construction and production. So, of course, this made all of that possible. But what is lost in the long run are the skills and talents of those that used to know how to do these things and make a living doing them, right?
Division of labor. And that meant instead of doing a whole project where you did it from beginning to end, you would only do one or two little steps. And then the next task was performed by the next person. So this is a very different way to do work at the time. He wanted to determine the one best way, a standard to do every part and every task to boost productivity. That's what he's really known for, looking for that one best way to solve the riddle. He also believed in hierarchy. He wanted a clear chain of command that separated all the employees at the bottom of the organization from all the managerial people toward the top. And
as you can see, our whole corporate industry, our whole production system is based on Taylorism, and it's also applied to education and many other institutions and industries, and you'll be able to pick up on that. And yeah, exactly, they are Emmanuel, now they're replacing every worker possible with automation and AI. Yeah, I've made this claim many times in the past that AI is taking Taylorism to the next level, because Taylorism is essentially about what? Efficiency. Efficiency. Taylorism is purely about efficiency. And what Elon Musk is doing is applying Taylorism via his technology to the government and eventually the rest of society.
And the reason he wanted to do this was that he wanted the managers to design the work process and enforce how that work was performed. Employees, as a result, would just follow directions. They just became doers, and the managers were then the thinkers. He believed in selection and training and compensation in a way that was a little different at the time.
Okay, we don't gotta go too much in it. I just want you guys to understand the basics. And for those that have been around a while, we've covered Taylorism. I've applied it to so many different things because it's so applicable. It's ingrained in our system of capitalism and in our system of industrialism and technological development. Ponzi, another way to look at it, yeah. Operation of a class system. There we go, Bar. You could see how you can apply it to many different structures. Absolutely. Very important to understand the significance of Taylorism, because it is a big part of how a lot of things work, especially in this country. Now, I want to read this here. It's a couple pages. This is from, let me pull this up. This is from The Country School of Tomorrow. Frederick Taylor Gates, right, one of these pioneers of this type of Prussian model education, along with Horace Mann. I'm going to read you a little excerpt from this here. And it's just blatant, guys. It's straight up blatant. It's not holding any punches. And what I like about this little piece here is it demonstrates, or at least it presents, how things started in the very beginning when America was essentially rural. There wasn't these big major cities and metropolitan areas. There wasn't this type of hegemonic culture. It was very decentralized. It was very diverse culturally speaking, in that there was, Spanish, French, British influences here and there, and regional areas were based on these different subcultures. Of course, terrain was different. There's just so many different crops, development, and different people groups. There was the history of America is so interesting because it was just such a diverse place. And when you see these guys coming in here, these robber barons, these aristocratic types, these like globalists coming in here, looking at this vast land of diversity and hope and chance and potential, right? I could see they're just looking at this as potential, but not human potential. And I don't mean to use that in any Huxleyan sense, but I mean in its most generic, basic sense. They're not looking at human potential and the ability for mankind to be free and individual, like what we're told America is about. No, they were looking at this as potential for their industries. And they're literally just cutting up this place and figuring out how to reel in and corral these different forms of cattle and fit them into their system. It's absolutely mind-blowing. But what I like about it is it gives a really good historical depiction of how they were thinking. And we can see those same ideas, or at least this same type of disposition being put forth today by way of the new billionaire class. It's just done in a new way. Now, let me read this. Bring it up here. Should be able to see this. There we go. Now, vision of the remedy. Is there aught of remedy for this neglect of rural life? Let us at least yield ourselves to the gratifications of a beautiful dream that there is. In our dream, we have limitless resources, and the people yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hand. Whew. Perfect docility to our molding hand. These people want to be gods. They've always wanted to be gods. And those in power now, those in influence now, are no different. All right. The present educational conventions fade from our minds, and unhampered by tradition, we work our own goodwill upon a grateful and responsive rural folk. You see how they're just saying, let's forget their culture? Let me read that again. The present educational conventions fade from our minds. Okay, who cares what you guys do now? And unhampered by tradition, unhampered by your ways of living and your folk ways and your ways of educating your children, we work our own goodwill upon a grateful and responsive rural folk. We shall not try to make these people or any of their children into philosophers or men of learning or of science. We are not to raise up from among them authors, orators, poets, or men of letters. We shall not search for embryo great artists, painters, musicians, nor will we cherish even the humbler ambition to raise up from among them lawyers, doctors, preachers, politicians, statesmen, of whom we now have ample supply. We don't need any of you people. We're not going to make any of you people great because we have our own ample supply. Why? Nepotism, right? It's never changed. They keep it within their families, the bloodlines. They have their bloodlines. They don't need us plebs. That's why bloodlines are important. They are, right? Because this is how they operate. It's always been the case. Now let's continue. We are to follow the admonitions of the good apostle who said, it just creeps me out the way they always refer to scripture too. The great apostle who said, mind not high things, but condescend to man of low degree. And generally, with respect to these high things, all that we shall try to do is just to create presently about these country homes and atmosphere and conditions such. Let me read that again. All that we shall try to do is just to create presently about these country homes and atmosphere and conditions such that if by chance a child of genius should spring up from the soil, that genius will surely bud and not be blighted. So they want to make a system good enough so at least they can cultivate any genius that happens to slip through the cracks, right? Because they always can use a little bit of those natural talented people. We see this happening in Hollywood, operates the same way, right? They look for these little talented people that slip through the cracks or might be vulnerable, and they bring them into the system and they corrupt them and they use them for their goals. Putting, therefore, all high things quite behind us, we turn with a sense of freedom and delight to the simple, lowly, needful things that promise well for rural life. For the task that we set before ourselves is a very simple as well as a very beautiful one, to train these people as we find them for a perfectly ideal life just where they are. Yes, ideal, for we shall allow ourselves to be extravagant since we are only dreaming. Call it idyllic, if you like, an idyllic life under the skies and within the horizon, however narrow, where they first open their eyes. Let's just build them a pretty cage, is what they're saying. Absolutely disgusting. We are to try to make that life just where it is, healthful, intelligent, efficient, to fill it with the thought and purpose and with a gracious social culture, not without its joys. So they're aware we have to bring them joy. We have to make them happy. We have to make them feel like what they have is great. Okay, this is exactly what Musk and Trump is doing right now with all of this fake pacifier policy crap, in my personal view. And I've made a lot of new enemies with a lot of my points recently. A lot of people have left. And I say good riddance. Because if anyone that's still playing within this game doesn't understand what's really going on, man. And it is getting hot right now. Things are speeding up and picking up. And I'm telling you, this social engineering, they are ramping it up. And many people are going to fall for it. And I'm aware of that. And I'm prepared for that. I will not stop. I will not shut up about it either. It's vital what's happening right now. The world possibly will be unrecognizable in 5 years. And I don't think people understand how serious that is. Let's continue. Every industry in a curriculum, they say here, let us take for illustration as the rural school unit, a territory of township, perhaps 6 miles square, 36 square miles, containing some 25,000 acres, and at present 150 families or more. We shall need a group of school buildings, and these we will place as the near center as possible, and for the more distant pupils arrange daily convenience in groups. So here they're designing how things are going to look. And it's just basic structure they're trying to describe here. But let's go down a little bit. And this is where the health comes in. This is what I'm telling you guys. Public policy, public health. Every single time. They go for the education, go for the politics, but also they include the health. They've been doing this since the beginning. So not only do they want to reform education because that controls mind, that's social engineering, that's mind control, that's culture creation. Now let's get a hold of their bodies. Now let's focus on the biology. Here we go. Our first plan shall be for health as the basis of all well-being and well-doing. You see that? The basis for all well-being and well-doing, health. Indeed, they have to control health too. And you know where they're going after that? Food. But let me read. We shall ferret out the local causes of ill health in the family and in the community. That's biosecurity, by the way. Also in the plant and animal life. Wow, sounds like one health initiative, doesn't it? Zoonotic spread. Let's continue. We shall call to our aid, of course, the experts from the chemical and the agricultural colleges and universities, our schools of forestry and of veterinary medicine. They shall examine and report. They shall lecture and demonstrate before us and be in constant correspondence with us. Sounds like CDC. Sounds like World Health Organization. We shall submit to them our two difficult problems, and they shall solve them for us. Closely associated with health is the daily supply of food. I was a-hungered, and ye gave me meat. It should be sufficiently varied, regularly provided, suitably and appetizingly cooked. Every girl and every boy shall be taught what to eat, and how to cook. At least three times a day throughout his life. Every one of us must eat. And the question of healthful and nutritious diet is perhaps the most important single question in life. Nor lives the man to whom this very thing is not, by providence, designed to be no inconsiderable part of his daily satisfaction. Can you believe this? Can you believe this? I mean, I'm sure you can. Goodness. They're like, yeah, we're going to control the food. We're going to teach you how to eat, teach you how to cook. We're going to show you every single person has to eat 3 meals a day. I mean, this is fascism, guys. Y'all paying attention? This is straight up fascism. I call it well, it's a academic term, but it's friendly fascism. This is friendly fascism. It's coming across as we're fixing things. We want to help you guys. We want to give you a great education. But at the end of the day, it's all about controlling and keeping people where they're at, as they said here. Right? An idyllic life under the skies, within the horizon, however narrow, where they first open their eyes. Right? Keeping them where they are at, so they can't necessarily grow. And if someone sneaks through the cracks, we're going to swoop them up and integrate them into our system and make them useful. Whew, man. This is the foundation of our education system, but not just education. This is the foundation of our entire society. And it amazes me that people think they can trust those in power, that they can trust politicians, that they can trust what we're told by people at podiums wearing suits and ties. It's mind-blowing. Mind-blowing. So I appreciate you all for being with me. We'll return next week as we dive deeper into some of these concepts as well as new concepts on the Wake Up Show. I appreciate you all. Thank you for being with me. I'll see you guys on the main channel. I'm actually getting ready to post another video today. Got to finish up some editing. Thank you for your guys' support, man. I really do. Got a lot of work to do this year. A lot is happening. A lot is going to happen. I'm glad you've supported me this far and this long, and continue to give my work meaning. Peace and blessings to you all.
Please do not forget to tip your server. Check out the merch shop for fire gear, links in the description. We appreciate your continued support. All praises to the Most High. We appreciate your continued